We follow up our discussion of the roaring 1920s, this sort of party decade of economic expansion and great celebrity and press and media and all that kind of fun stuff with the 1930s. Sad. The era of the Great Depression actually beginning more or less in October of 1929, but basically the entire decade of the 1930s is going to be consumed with this massive series of economic recessions that we come to collectively call the Great Depression. So in our discussion, we're going to deal with how the Roosevelt administration tried to deal with that. We're going to pull apart the New Deal, or the first New Deal, the second New Deal, kind of how these operated. We're going to talk about an unfortunately long list of sort of alphabet soup, acronym-laden programs by the federal government. So for those of you trying to study for the exams and you've got this long list of letters to try to keep straight in your head, don't blame me. Socialists love acronyms. I guess it makes them feel like they're in the military, and so they're the ones that came up with this stuff, not me. So we are going to go through not all of the programs because that would take the rest of your life, but we're going to go through some of the salient ones, and we're going to talk about them in the context of the New Deal, and a few of them, like Social Security, in the context of today, because many of these programs are still around. Some, not so much. A bunch of them are still with us. We're going to talk about criticism of the New Deal from both the sort of conservatives and even the more liberal sort of wings of American political spectrum. And so to that end, we're going to look at how the Supreme Court dealt with it, how guys like Huey Long and a few other people dealt with it, and we're going to talk about the political side of this, but we're also going to deal with sort of the social history of the United States. How did the 1930s affect American society? So you guys hopefully get my little joke, the world is depressed, because the world is in a great economic depression, and our main character here for this in the United States is going to be Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or as he was known also by an acronym, his initials FDR. He assumed the presidency in 1933, and his inaugural address really is going to set the tone for his first two terms, because he is going to be the only person elected to more than 2 terms of office. He would actually be elected to 4. But the first 2 are really going to be consumed with dealing with the Great Depression. And then the second 2 are essentially going to be World War II terms, where he's going to be dealing with in the run-up to the United States' entry into World War II, and then, of course, prosecuting the war against Germany, Italy, and Japan. So most of you guys probably, if I were to start and say, well, what was Roosevelt's first inaugural address? What was the tagline for that? And if I got you kind of rolling on that, and some of you may even be able to say it right now without any prompting, but we have nothing to fear. Oh, but fear itself. Yeah, we remember that. That's really great, salient kind of stuff. Americans, the only thing that was a problem was they were afraid. If they could overcome that fear, economic depression would fix itself, and that was kind of the message of that. But when you watch the video's on the site. I don't have it on the slideshow for this one, but if you watch the video, when Roosevelt says that, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. And there's kind of dead silence, and then he just keeps going, okay, and doesn't get a big reaction. We react to it now and sort of clasp our hands over our chest and go, such great courage in times of darkness. But yeah, the Americans that were at his inaugural, it didn't really make much of an effect on them. The line that really brought down the House, that really got the strongest reaction, was the one where he said that he would assume any means necessary to fix the economic crisis. That he would assume broad executive powers, the same as if America had been invaded by a foreign foe. And of course, broad executive power. Yay! So this is pretty scary stuff on the one hand, because of course the same month that Roosevelt is inaugurated, you've got guys like Adolf Hitler assuming power in Germany saying some of the same kind of stuff. So to know a little bit about FDR, you've got to understand his background, why he does the things that he does. FDR himself, he was physically debilitated. He had suffered from polio since he had been a young man. He did require a wheelchair. But this fact, of course, was hidden from the public for the most part, and in the 1930s, you could get away with that. You could sort of schedule your appearances and do it in such a way that people didn't know. A lot of times he would campaign in an open-top car, and he's sitting in the back of the car and he's just waving to people in like a parade kind of thing. Well, of course he's not going to get up and walk around because he's in a car. A few times he would go and give a speech, and he'd have these two people standing right next to him as bodyguards, and of course they're really the ones holding him up as he kind of hobbles up to the podium, and then he had a hidden stool behind it, and so really when he's delivering these speeches and it looks like he's standing up, he actually is sitting down. Of course, instead of photographing him standing up, a lot of times he would have an artist do a rendering of him, powerfully walking forward. Well, an artist can do anything, right? I mean, it can make Superman fly. It could give Roosevelt, like 4 legs, or in this case, just 2 legs that actually work. So this fact was hidden from the public, right? But FDR was a master of style, and he understood how to manipulate image, and he understood how to contact people directly. One of his great successes politically, and also governmentally, was to address the nation through a series of what he called fireside chats over the radio. By this point, by the 1930s, radio was a lot like television or the internet, that basically it was in every American's home, and the radio would be put usually in the living room, and a lot of times Americans would sort of sit around and they'd listen to these radio programs together, whether it's dramatic, whether it's the news, whether it's comedy, and so much like TV in later decades. And so in this case, Roosevelt would say, hey, I'm sitting here, I'm talking to you, you're in your living room, I'm here at the White House, let's just have a little chat, you and I. And so it created this idea that there was a direct connection between the American people and Roosevelt. And so on the one hand, he used this to uplift the nation through times of depression. His first one dealt with the banking industry. Hey, you don't have to worry about the banks, this is why we need to invest in the banks to make sure they don't fail, that kind of thing. And so it also burnished FDR's prestige politically. Now, during the campaign here in 1932, when Roosevelt was elected, he had promised the New Deal. Okay, basically the idea was all the cards have been dealt out, and they're just crummy cards, and so what we're going to do is we're just pick them up and we're going to deal them back out again. All right, and this was government fixes for the Depression. He had often sold this as criticizing the Hoover administration of using too much government to fix the Depression, but in fact, Roosevelt is basically just the inheritor of the old progressive style. That it's big government, solves all these problems, and is going to come in and do this. And on the one hand, I think Americans really wanted a New Deal, but not necessarily the New Deal. This is the one that they're going to get, and it's actually going to prove to be pretty popular. So this is Roosevelt at his inaugural. This is when he delivers those lines that I mentioned before. And this is the real Roosevelt, a very rare photograph of him in the wheelchair. This is with a family, I think he's his cousin, the girl's cousin, his cousin or something like that. So, all right, the New Deal Part 1, because in a lot of ways it's kind of 2 New Deals. It goes through at least a couple of mutations. FDR targeted what he referred to as the 3 R's: relief, recovery, and reform. And so you've got the immediate demands of, okay, people are hurting, they're out of work, they need to just get through the next week or month or 2 months or however long. And then, of course, recovery is the idea that, all right, we need a more long-term, get the economy sort of moving again, get it to where people can have jobs again. And then the very long-term idea of reform, which is how do we prevent crashes like this from happening again? So those are going to be the 3 ideas that are going to be going forward, and they're more or less going to be on parallel tracks. All right. So basically, the idea behind the first New Deal was that the government is going to manage the economy back to health. The government's going to come in, it's going to tell the economy what to do, and the economy is going to employ what he referred to as a sort of brain trust, these really super smart kind of technocrat people. They're going to look at all the numbers, they're going to look at how the economy is supposed to work, and they're going to tell everybody what to do, and it's just going to fix it. To this end, for example, FDR is going to give banks a holiday to prevent runs on the banks. You can't go have a run on the bank when the bank is not open that day. And so it gives them a chance to kind of close up shop to where they don't have to issue out money. He's going to use that period to stabilize the banking industry, and then, of course, they're going to reopen, and they'll be in a lot sturdier kind of shape. You're also going to see that the Congress at this point is also very much in the hands of the Democrat Party. They had won majorities in 1928. They're going to extend their majorities in 1930, and they're going to extend those majorities in 1932. And of course, at this point, you were sort of wasting your time to be a Republican in Congress. I mean, you kind of sat there and you're like, I don't really agree with any of this stuff that's going on. Yeah, shut up. There's not enough of you to matter. So he's going to get whatever he wants from the Congress. You've got a Democrat president who wins an overwhelming landslide victory. You've got a Democrat Congress who can pretty safely ignore anything the Republicans want to say. And so this is going to go through this massive period of sort of marathon legislation, often referred to as the 100 days. Right? It's 100 days, this 3-month period of the first part of Roosevelt's term. The first thing they're going to tackle is banking reform. Congress is going to step in and say, okay, the president can regulate these guys. And so that's going to allow him to do a lot of what he wants to do with this. They're also going to create the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the idea that it's going to insure holdings in banks so that if the bank fails, you'll get your money back. Now, of course, any logical person would say, wait a minute, if all the banks in America fail, the government doesn't have enough money to give us all our cash back. That's true. It's not really designed to have, sort of money in a hole somewhere that it can just pay you. It's designed to instill confidence so that you'll feel confident in going and giving your money, putting your money back in the bank. So that way lending can begin again. FDR is going to inflate the U.S. currency by buying gold at inflated rates to try to monetize some of the debt that was taking place, and then also to change the way that the trading was taking place in a lot of sectors. Congress is then going to create the Civilian Conservation Corps. One of the problems that they were worried about facing was young men, especially guys that are 18 to 25 that aren't married. They go out, they try to find jobs, they can't find jobs, and they don't have a family to sort of give them a moral compass, basically. A lot of these guys are worried going to turn to crime. And of course, if nothing else, they're going to be a drain on their family because they're not going to be sort of living on their own, wondering, well, what am I going to do, for food or whatever. They're going to be, a lot of these guys may still be living at home, and so the Civilian Conservation Corps is going to come in. They're going to give these young men jobs, and they're going to get them out of wherever they are. They're going to take them off these work camps out in the middle of nowhere, and they're going to find whatever job they can for them: cleaning parks, cleaning roadways, firefighting, cutting fire breaks, flood control, basically any kind of outdoor work project in these little camps. And of course, it gives them a stipend, a little bit of money for themselves, but also it's going to send some money back to the house for mama, and it's going to feed them, it's going to take care of them, give them clothes and stuff like that. So there you go. Ladies, you can enjoy this next series of slides where it's got young men with their shirts off. So this is a CCC camp. They got their little axes in front of them. They're posing for a photo. And so as you go through and you look at all of these programs, like I mentioned at the beginning, it's kind of an alphabet soup of these programs, right? The centerpiece of all this is how to get the economy going again. And that is the two major sectors of American commerce, and that's the agricultural sector and the industrial sector. And the main issue threatening both of these is unemployment. You've got farms that are shut down, you've got factories that are shut down. So FDR is going to look at this problem and is going to go back to his old solution, which is government. Government's going to come in and they're going to solve the problem. The AAA is the Agricultural Allotment Act. And this is going to loan money to farmers, but it's also really going to seek to come in and to control the supply and thus on the back end the prices of farm products. So that way farm products will be reaching the market at the right time, in the right quantities, at the right price. So that way the farmers are making money, and then also there's food on the market, so that way the people who don't grow food for a living can get by. And so the government is going to attempt to set these production numbers and to control their time and entry and amount of entry into the market. So parallel with that, concomitantly, the National Recovery Act oversees industry and labor. So working with the National Industrial Recovery Agency, the NRA is going to regulate the production numbers, the prices, and the wages of workers. Basically everything. If you went along with the NRA program, that was what you did. In a lot of cases, you kind of turned over control of your business to the federal government. And it gets kind of out of hand. There was a tailor, I think, in New York City who was trying to make a little extra money by making some extra pants, but he had gone over his quota and said, like, the government came in, like, no, you can't make more pants. So this is what's going on with this. All right, the plan did have a component that allowed organized labor to finally have some set rights. Finally, one of FDR's major constituent groups is organized labor. The Wagner Act takes care of that. So FDR, basically the Roosevelt administration, is trying to reach a sweet spot, right? That target idea of the right amount of goods on the market at the right prices, just at kind of the right time, right? Now, it is somewhat successful initially. The problem with this is business moves fast and government moves slow. And there's just no getting around that. And the fact that, government is full of people that really, no matter how smart they are, they're pretty stupid. So, business makes decisions every day on what's going to make them money. Government makes decisions based on political concerns, what's going to get us votes. And so these two, are constantly fighting each other. And so over the course of time, the government is going to prove to be unable to keep up with the market trends, and the depression is going to continue. Now, this is in the early part. These restaurants and these businesses, they hang up these little NRA banners. We do our part. We're going along with the government. We're going to do what they say. And of course, eventually, they would have to turn against that and do something else because it really wasn't working. So you've got a lot of other problems. One of the major issues that's going to take place here is the Dust Bowl that's going to commence here in 1933. on the one hand, you've got some long-term kind of issues that are finally catching up to a lot of Midwestern farmers, and that is over-farming. You have overproduction, the removal of trees, and other kind of issues that are going on where these guys are trying to make up for the fact they're losing money per acre. So you just grow more acres, but of course that then drives down the price as more product hits the market. So you've got over-farming, and then of course with the Depression, you've got the sudden disuse of these farms. So you got in some cases, bare sort of open earth in huge sections of western Kansas, Nebraska, and these kind of areas. And then you couple that with a massive drought. So you do have a natural phenomenon that takes place, in which case, all right, we're going to have a massive drought that's going to come in, and you hit that right around the time a lot of these farms, they cease operation due to being foreclosed on at the beginning of the Great Depression, and it's going to create this Dust Bowl phenomenon. The prevailing westerly winds are going to pick up this Midwestern dust. They're going to blow it all throughout this area. Cattle are going to die. The crops that are there, in some cases, are going to be badly damaged, and it's going to blow this eastward. And the Dust Bowl isn't going to be confined just to the Midwest. It's going to blow eastward across the United States. It's going to blow to New York City. People in New York City were complaining about an inch of dust on their hats and the shoulders of their coats and stuff like that. And even you could detect 500 miles out into the Atlantic Ocean. Ships at sea could see this cloud of dust. All right. Congress is going to come in and try to help these people. They've got through debt relief, and also they provide subsidies for farmers not to grow. This is going to be one of the earliest periods where, we'll pay you as long as you don't grow more crops. I'm a farmer, you're going to pay me to not grow stuff. How does that work? Well, if you grow more and you put it on the market, then it'll deflate, it'll decrease the price, it'll inflate that kind of stuff. And so it makes sense if you look at the big picture. If you say so, paying farmers to not grow stuff makes sense. FDR is going to be really the first Northerner post-Civil War to look at the American South and go, they got economic problems down there, which of course had been true since like 1865 or so. But a lot of people, especially Northern politicians, kind of ignored it. The South was its own animal, and they didn't really care a whole lot about it. It didn't have a whole lot of electoral strength. And so, they got the South and they got the West to vote for them, but that was basically it. Roosevelt went so far as to say, as bad as it is, in the steel mills of Pittsburgh and the factories of Cleveland and Detroit and stuff like that, the South is actually economic problem number one. That they've got, they've been behind the times economically in large measure, and of course the Depression hits them extremely hard because they don't have as much to start with. He's going to target the South for a number of programs, especially the regulation of electricity via the Tennessee Valley Authority. You can still go through a lot of this area west of the Appalachian Mountains where the TVA's got dams built, extending rural electrification, and also regulating power to make sure that people could get electricity at affordable prices. One of the long-term changes that Congress is going to bring because of the Great Depression is the SEC, not the sports conference in college, but the Securities and Exchange Commission. The idea was that if you create transparency where people know what's going on with publicly traded stocks, then it will decrease the chance of crashes. And basically that's true. We have had one sort of massive crash that took place in 1987, but that was because computers were ever increasingly trading these stocks. And there was a computer glitch, and it crashed. But then it immediately came back up because everybody realized, okay, the value of these companies hasn't gone through the floor. And we have had dips. We had some pretty big dips. But we haven't had a massive crash like you saw in 1929. So the SEC is still there, still providing transparency so that if you're trading stocks, you have to inform investors and the public of, hey, this is what's going on with the stock, this is what's going on with the company. You get earnings reports quarterly, blah, blah, blah. If you're into that kind of thing. The Securities and Exchange Commission overwatches that, all of that. And the most sweeping change, and the one that still affects us today, of the New Deal was Social Security. All right. Now, Social Security actually, provides a lot of different things. Okay. It provides insurance for the unemployed, the destitute, and the disabled. But really, most of the time when we think about it now, it was to provide the retirement subsidy for elderly workers. But of course, how do you pay the elderly workers here in the 1930s? They haven't been paying into the system. Shouldn't you, you want to have people put into an account, and then when they retire, say in the 1960s or something, 30 years after the 1930s, then they get their money out. No. The way that it works, of course, is the elderly that were put on Social Security here in the 1930s, they were getting the tax money that was being taxed by younger generations of workers. And basically the system still works like that today, all right? To where those of you who have jobs and you pay into Social Security now, you're not paying into some kind of account that you're going to tap into later, or that you could, say, sell, or that even you can will to your descendants if you die early. This is actually a system where your tax money is being paid to people that are currently retired. So, like it or not, that's how it is. All right. The reason for all of this is actually FDR is hoping that this is the kind of cash stimulus that people would be able to go out and buy things in the economy. So FDR is kind of trying a little bit of everything. So here's a photo of this sort of Dust Bowl cloud as it's working its way eastward across the United States. It looks like one of those giant sort of sandstorms you might see in some kind of fantasy picture set in the Middle East somewhere. But this is America here in the 1930s. This is how you sell stuff, right? The people to, how do you get them to create this, to vote to create this sort of monstrous program that is going to just keep getting bigger and bigger and harder to fund? Well, you tell them it's free money from the government. And then when anybody comes in and says, yeah, I'm running for Congress, I really like to reform this kind of thing, well, then their opponent just comes and is like, that rat, he just wants to kick you out in the street, you're not going to get your money from the government anymore, he doesn't care about you. And then, of course, makes it harder for that guy to get elected. And then let's to reform this kind of system. So this is what it is. Literally, you can see the government propaganda. You get the arm from the government just delivering you a check, almost from heaven. Okay, the New Deal does run into a great deal of criticism. All right, and you've got two main cons. You've got people that say it's going too far. All right, it's creating too much big government. You've got too much. Too much big government, it's giving too much power and authority to the federal government. It's going beyond what the Constitution allowed the government to have. And then the other group of people are saying, it doesn't go far enough. The government needs to come in and really redistribute wealth and really do this. FDR, for his part, he managed to kind of skillfully weave in between both of these and kind of thread the needle. All right. On the one hand, you've got conservative critics of the New Deal. All right, they're going to charge FDR with all kinds of vociferous things. Creating a virtual dictatorship, shredding the Constitution, being too big and too powerful. Business leaders complained a lot. They came in and sort of like, the New Deal comes in and shreds business practices, taking over a lot of what we're doing. But the main opposition, because of people that can actually do something about a lot of this legislation, is going to come from the Supreme Court, which is going to shoot down many of FDR's proposals, especially early in the sort of mid-1930s, which is going to include the Agricultural Allotment Act and the National Recovery Agency, which is to say the AAA, agriculture is basically a local matter, and in the cases of both, that it gives legislative power to the executive. And so it's unconstitutional. The president is assuming too much power. Now, in his second term, FDR tried to come in and basically say, well, if the court's not going to vote for me, I'm going to propose to make some changes to the Supreme Court. And his proposal, he couched it in terms like this: well, the nation's getting bigger, and 9 justices just really isn't enough anymore. We really need a bigger court to, represent a broader nation. Maybe a 13-person court rather than a 9-person court. Now, of course, everybody realized that if Congress, okay, yeah, we'll make some changes here. We need 13 people in the Supreme Court. Who's going to get to appoint those 4 new justices? Well, it's going to be Roosevelt. He's going to pick New Dealers, and they're going to be the ones that are going to vote for him. And a lot of people realize, man, he's trying to take over the Supreme Court. And in a lot of cases, this huge firestorm, really from his own party in Congress, they're kind of like, whoa, FDR, you're taking over the whole government. That's too much. It created a massive problem, and really is going to derail a lot of FDR's second term legislatively because of his attempt to pack the court with more justices. Ironically, what's going to happen is some of the conservative justices on the court realized, what Roosevelt was trying to do, and they just decided, okay, if that's how it's going to be, we'll just vote with Roosevelt a little more often. One of them actually was quoted as saying, "A switch in time saves 9," in that we won't have to be packed full of Roosevelt's appointees. You've got, on the other side of the coin, you've got really some more socialist members of society, socialist members of Congress. They wanted more than FDR, who was a real big government guy anyway. When you want more than FDR's willing to give, that's saying a lot. Best example is Huey Long. He was a senator from Louisiana, and he proposes just out-and-out socialism through his Share Our Wealth program, where basically all the money in America will be spread like peanut butter equally across each citizen. And of course, you can have a lot of issues that would come with that. So you can see issues issuing from the Supreme Court. And then there's Huey Long with this. You can hear a little song that Huey sings when you play this on your own. It's just great. He's pitching every man a king. It's actually Huey Long singing this little song. So for those of you who ever wanted to hear senators from the South sing political songs, this class is for you, all right? So let's look at the second New Deal, all right? And this is really kind of at the end of FDR's first term and then on into the second term. FDR, and I told you to remember Herbert Hoover. When Herbert Hoover's running for re-election in 1932, the crowds are, they're shouting at him and they're blaming on Hoover and all this kind of stuff because the economy is bad, all right? Now, in 1936, FDR is running for re-election. And he goes out and asks these crowds, he says, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And what's interesting here is really they weren't. If you look at the numbers, unemployment was, was a little better. The economy was a little better, So you would expect maybe if you look at the numbers the way they are today, in sort of the rearview mirror, you would expect that when a guy like Roosevelt comes out and he says, hey, we're in the middle of this economic depression, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? You would expect the crowd to, some, maybe a few people would be kind of excited. Yeah, I got a job, back, or something like that. But you wouldn't expect a lot of enthusiasm, people just sort of, yeah, it's great, it's awesome, But that's the response that they get. When Roosevelt and his people go out and they campaign, so, vote for us again because are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Yeah, woo! The reason for this is not due to any sort of empirical evidence that was going on. Because what is different about Roosevelt running for re-election than Hoover running for re-election is appearances, okay? He appeared to care. Hoover could be very easily painted as this sort of unfeeling, kind of heartless guy. Roosevelt, despite the fact that most of his programs were abject failures, and in fact, as we're going to see, sort of made matters worse, it looked like he's trying. And you're going to see that he's going to run for re-election. He's going to win relatively easily, all right? But he did understand that a new tack had to be taken economically. So the first New Deal is focusing on supply, trying to get products to market. The government's going to come in and manage this kind of stuff. The second is going to address demand, okay? Well, we can't get the product to market properly. FDR is going to try to put more dollars in people's hands, and then they'll go out and they'll demand stuff from the economy, all right? He attempted this via deficit spending for a number of programs, straight up direct relief, all right? The expanded Social Security program, increased federal jobs program, all right? The most extensive of these jobs program was the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, that put both blue-collar and white-collar workers back on the job in their field or as close to it as they possibly could. And it also provides for job training and job placement, especially for young people that are entering the job market, that are looking to say, hey, I need to get a job, there are no jobs available, so trying to provide some job training for these people. So when you look at this, you look at all this red, that's for Roosevelt. He wins 98.5% of the electoral college vote, and he gets a 61% of the popular vote. Broad support basically everywhere. You sort of wonder, what's Vermont and Maine thinking, right? So, you look at this and say, well, the economy must have been just rip-roaring back to life because people, they elect Roosevelt in 32s in the middle of the Depression, and so by 1936 he must have fixed it. No, that's not what happened. But looks like he cared, and of course people are going to vote for him. So as you go on here, ever increasingly you see signs like this, USA Work Program, in this case it is WPA. This was pitched to a lot of people. The New Deal means government jobs, right? And you'd see these work crews. They're out here. You got the blue-collar guys, building the road or doing whatever, and they've got their shovel, they've got their wheelbarrows full of dirt. And of course, you then got the white-collar guys that are drawing up technical plans or coming up with, they're doing the daily work schedule as the manager. So you've got all these people that, for the most part, can be kind of put back into jobs for things like that. Young people being trained as typists, so that way they can get jobs in an office somewhere through government works program. What do you do with out-of-work artists? Well, you send them painting mural projects all over the place. And so you're going to have literature people that are paid to write books, and you're going to have artists that are paid to paint paintings. You'll also notice that this is a pretty stark, kind of realistic style. This is not sort of fanciful kind of stuff. These are everyday kind of folks that are working hard to kind of make their way through their day-to-day lives. When we look at this from a political point, rather than just a strictly governmental side, the fallout of the New Deal was basically a windfall of votes for the Democrat Party. All right? The New Deal is going to create a coalition of voter groups that are going to form the nucleus of the Democrat Party for basically the next several decades. And a lot of them are still sort of in this core today. These groups are, in no particular order, women. All right, especially sort of progressive, highly educated women. They had really reached their political maturity by the time of the 1930s. Some of these people, these ladies had gone to college in the 1890s or early 1900s, and so by the 1930s or so, they're in their 40s and 50s. This would be the point which, if they were in private business, you would expect them being on the boards of directors of companies, or maybe the CEOs of various things, or running hospitals if they had been doctors or something like that. That's not really going to happen because of the social differences between men and women in the workforce. But as these women are working their way through the ranks of the government here, they're appointed in increasingly large numbers by Roosevelt to some pretty important government posts. You're going to have your first female cabinet minister in the government. You're going to have a lot of these women for the first time are going to be put into positions of power by the Roosevelt administration. They're sort of spiritual leader, not literally spiritual, but is going to be Eleanor Roosevelt, the president's wife. Eleanor Roosevelt is really the first of kind of the active, kind of first ladies that wasn't just there to organize the social events at the White House and be kind of window dressing. She was an advocate for her husband's policies. She actually went out and spoke, and so you kind of see that, more and more as you go on today. And these women are going to exercise a pretty pivotal political role as well. African Americans are given access to the White House for the first time via the Black Cabinet. This is a group of African Americans that is going to come in and they're going to say, hey, look, this is what's going on in the African American community. It's led by people like Mary McLeod Bethune, Ralph Bunche, and they're going to come in and they're going to advise about these civil rights issues. Now, one of the problems that you may have, of course, with Southern African Americans politically to say, hey, listen, we really need you people to vote for us, is you may upset other people. Because, of course, their number one political issue is we want to see civil rights. We want to see an end to Jim Crow. We want to see an end to lynching in the South. So as a result of that, the cabinet was officially kind of head up that was put together by Eleanor Roosevelt to avoid alienating Southern white Democrats. They attracted by the attention of the New Deal, especially in forms of dollars, these federal programs of work, direct relief, and electrification. But when they would complain to Roosevelt, hey, Roosevelt, what's about this black cabinet? This is black people, we really don't want to see Jim Crow in. What are you doing? What are you doing talking with them? Roosevelt could, at this point at least, in his presidency, he could play both sort of groups off against each other and say, well, listen, this is Eleanor's kind of thing, right? And she really is interested in all those people. Don't worry about it. We're not serious about this kind of thing. And then, of course, he could walk into this meeting with African Americans. Your issues are important to me. And so he's going to really garner an increasing amount of support from both groups. All right? Urban workers, a lot of these people were thrown into unemployment. And, of course, many of these government plans are going to seek them out first because it's easy to hand out, bread and soup to a huge number of people if you go to a city. That's where you're going to find more of these people. All right? You're also going to see that direct relief allowed a lot of these people to survive in an area where you can't grow your own food. Right? Unionized labor is given official sanction thanks to the Wagner Act via the New Deal, and so organized labor, at least in terms of its leadership, has been very faithfully Democrat ever since. When we look at the social shifts that are going on here in the 1930s, you're going to see that the party decade of the 1920s really comes to kind of a crashing halt in 1929. What replaces it is a much more sober decade of the 1930s. And so the upbeat tempo of jazz and some of the other sort of variants that you might have heard is often replaced by much more somber sounds. And a good example of this is the blues. Of course, the blues is a Southern African American product. It is a product of sharecroppers who don't have a particularly good lot in life, and their music reflects that. It did find its way in front of white audiences. I don't want you to get the idea that sort of you just turned on the radio in the 1930s on respectable, white-owned radio stations and heard a lot of blues, because you didn't. But it ever increasingly did find its way in front of white audiences. But it really gives a good idea, if you listen to it, to reflect really the morose feelings of the era. It's got much slower beats and bemoaning lyrics. Instead of this big band, really playing this upbeat kind of stuff, it's like one guy, like Robert Johnson, who's playing the guitar, and he's talking about, instead of tap dancing on, a giant fountain with these sort of flapper girls in Paris, sipping champagne out of these big glasses, Robert Johnson is just talking about the fact that he's trying to get from one town to another, his car breaks down. His girlfriend is really unattractive. Stuff like that. So this is what's going on. It gives you a good little window into the changing sort of mindset of the times. If you look at the literary issues of the day, focusing ever increasingly on these realistic topics of the Depression, of these people that are going through the day-to-day kind of lives and struggles. A good example of this is Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath. Steinbeck wrote it as kind of a socialist novel, that this is why we should all be these socialists. But most of the time when you read Grapes of Wrath, at least what I get out of it when I read it is, man, these people put up with a lot to try to survive and get out of the Dust Bowl and go across the United States to California where they hope to find jobs. Right? The visual arts, like we saw with the mural paintings, have followed this mean as well. We're going to see realistic people instead of kind of super attractive. There's going to be average working day people. They're going to be a little bit, in some cases, overweight or not attractive. They got warts, dirty fingernails. They're wearing overalls. Working at the cannery. Whatever it is that they're doing. Visual arts give us a good idea of sort of a realistic snapshot rather than anything that's kind of fanciful, right? Now, one of the things that you would not expect to happen, that does happen here, is in the 1930s you're going to have the golden age of Hollywood. You wouldn't think in an era of declining incomes that people would be spending money going to the movies, but in fact Americans did flock to the movies in order to provide escapism for the stress of life. You go in and when you watch a movie you accept the reality of that. Okay, aliens are landing, or that guy can turn into a werewolf, or what, you just kind of, alright, that's what's going on with this. And so this is escapism. And so unlike what you're going to see in a lot of the other artistic endeavors of the day, you don't see a lot of realism. There would be some, they talk about the Depression and they talk about what's going on, but a lot of the most successful films are wealthy people, having these wealthy sort of adventures. They're wearing tuxedos. They're going to these big parties. Good example is if you watch through some of the old Shirley Temple movies, where she in almost all of them, she starts out as like an orphan, or she's only got one parent, or something like that. But they wind up usually at the end, with some money, and she goes off and has these adventures where she gets a pony or whatever. So anyway, I watch a lot of Shirley Temple movies because of my wife and my daughter. So anyway. This is what you're seeing here. You get these huge, kind of musical numbers. The biggest of the lot was in 1939. You got Gone with the Wind. You got The Wizard of Oz. You get these big sort of fanciful sets, big musical numbers. And so when you look at the New Deal, though, in the rearview mirror, okay, from our point, kind of in the present, all right. FDR does get a big boost here in political support for his actions, but he's going to rapidly expand the size and scope of the federal government in order to do so. States are going to complain a lot about the loss of power that they have, that a lot of federal programs are going to come in and say, you guys got to do this and this and this and this. There had been the idea that really prior to the New Deal, the states kind of ran the show. The federal government had some stuff that it did. And during wartime, for example, like during the First World War, the states kind of understood, okay, we're at war, and the federal government, war and defense is its kind of thing, and so we understand that. But this wasn't a war. This was just peacetime. And states are going to have a lot of complaints that you've got some permanent programs that are going to come in and really start telling them what they have to do on domestic issues. Businesses obviously are going to complain a lot of regulation, and some of these regulations still kind of kick around today. Like I mentioned, a lot of these programs are going to remain in place for decades. A lot of them are still going to be there today. Many programs remain popular, but many have come under increasing pressure for reform because they create regulation, and of course you have to have the taxation necessary to run them. All right. Now, the immediate effects were less than successful. All right. Some argue that it provided aid to the needy. It undoubtedly did. And that was a success sort of by itself, that it kind of uplifted people's spirits, and the little bit of good that it did, was worth it, right? But nobody with any sort of level of sanity would say, yeah, the New Deal came in and it ended the Depression. It just fixed all these problems, because it just didn't. I mean, nobody can look at the numbers and rationally say that happened. In fact, a lot of economists have said that, hey, if FDR hadn't done a lot of the tinkering that he had done with, creating massive government regulations, that the Depression, in fact, would have ended a lot sooner. So we don't know, because that's counterfactual history saying, well, if they hadn't done this, then this would have happened. Well, they didn't do that. That's not what happened. All right? What we are going to see is that the gathering war clouds in Europe and Asia are what's going to finally put Americans back to work, but it's not going to be building cars and washing machines. It's going to be building bombs and building tanks. And so that's what's going to bring the Great Depression to an end, and not anything that really Roosevelt was going to do. And so really by 1939, especially with the outbreak of World War II, we're going to see that the Depression is going to be over, but really not thanks to the New Deal, and more or less in spite of it. So this is going to be the end of our discussion here on